Before we get into the breathing protocol itself, I need to tell you something up front. A lot of what circulates online about this exact technique, including a supposed classified Johns Hopkins study of 11 businessmen, does not check out. I looked. There is no published or classified Johns Hopkins study matching that description anywhere in the university's research archives, press releases, or academic literature. Unverified, remove or check. This claim could not be independently confirmed and appears to be fabricated for marketing purposes. This doesn't mean everything in this video is fake. The vagus nerve is real. Polyvagal theory is real. Peer-reviewed neuroscience, built up over 3 decades of published academic work. Breathing techniques that raise heart rate variability are genuinely well studied and genuinely useful for stress regulation. But the manifestation, magnetic frequency, and broadcasting a signal to attract opportunity framing you'll see in a lot of these videos is not neuroscience. It's a marketing layer, bolted on top of real physiology. My job today is to separate the two, give you the legitimate technique, and tell you honestly where the science actually ends. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body. It runs from your brainstem down through your neck, chest, and abdomen, connecting to your heart, lungs, digestive organs, and vocal cords along the way. Vagus comes from the Latin word for wandering, which is a fitting name. It touches nearly every major organ system involved in how your body responds to stress and safety. The nerve is the primary channel of your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest counterpart to your fight-or-flight sympathetic system. When it's functioning well, it helps your heart rate come down after stress, supports digestion, and helps your body shift out of high alert states efficiently. It's also bidirectional. Roughly 80% of vagus nerve fibers actually carry information from your body up to your brain, not the other way around, which is part of why gut health, breathing, and posture can all influence mood and stress levels, and not just the reverse. This bidirectional pathway is sometimes called the gut-brain axis, and it's an legitimate area of ongoing research, particularly around how gut microbiome composition might influence mood through vagal signaling. These come from entirely different frameworks. One is a well-mapped physical nerve in Western anatomy. The other is a concept from an anatomical, energetic model in yogic philosophy. Treating them as the same structure is a category error, even though both traditions independently developed practices, breathing, chanting, posture, that happen to influence the same physiological systems. The most important real research behind this topic comes from Dr. Stephen Porges. Not Stephen Porges at Indiana University specifically. Though Porges has held academic positions at multiple institutions, including Indiana University's Kinsey Institute and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In 1994, Porges introduced polyvagal theory, a genuinely influential framework in psychophysiology. Polyvagal theory is real and well documented. Though it's worth noting, the theory has also drawn substantive scientific criticism from some physiologists over specific evolutionary and mechanistic claims. It's an influential model, not an uncontested consensus. Porges' theory describes the vagus nerve as having 2 distinct branches with different evolutionary origins. The dorsal branch is older and associated with shutdown, freeze, and dissociation responses. What happens when a threat feels inescapable? The ventral branch is newer, evolutionarily, and associated with social engagement, a state of being calm, present, and able to connect with others while still remaining alert. Porges calls this combination neuroception, your nervous system's largely unconscious process of scanning the environment for cues of safety or danger, and shifting your physiological state accordingly, often before you're consciously aware of the shift. Polyvagal theory actually describes 3 states total, arranged in a rough hierarchy that reflects our evolutionary history. The most primitive is the dorsovagal shutdown state, freeze, collapse, dissociation, which we share with reptiles and very early vertebrates. Above that sits the sympathetic fight-or-flight state, mobilizing energy for action. At the top of the hierarchy sits the ventrovagal state, unique to mammals, which allows social engagement, connection, and calm alertness at the same time. Therapists working within this framework often describe the goal of nervous system regulation as helping clients move up that hierarchy out of shutdown, out of pure fight or flight, and into ventral vagal engagement, rather than trying to eliminate stress responses entirely, which isn't realistic or even desirable, since some sympathetic activation is genuinely useful for performance under pressure. This part is legitimate and useful to understand. A lot of people do spend much of their days cycling between sympathetic activation, stress, and dorsal shutdown, numbness, avoidance, freeze, without regularly accessing that kombu-engaged ventral state. Breathing practices, humming, and certain postures are genuinely documented ways to nudge the nervous system toward that ventral state. Where the original framing goes wrong is in claiming this state causes external opportunities and coincidences to appear in your life. Improved nervous system regulation can absolutely change how you show up in a negotiation, an interview, or a difficult conversation. Better composure, clearer thinking, less reactive decision-making. That's a real, well-supported mechanism. Manifesting outcomes through a biological signal is not. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is the variation in time between consecutive heartbeats. It's a real, widely used, clinically validated measure. Higher HRV is generally associated with better autonomic nervous system flexibility, the ability to shift appropriately between stress response and recovery. Lower HRV is associated with chronic stress, poor recovery, and in some studies, increased cardiovascular risk over time. HRV is measured in a few different ways in research and clinical settings, commonly through metrics like RMSSD, root mean square of success, differences between heartbeats, and SDNN, standard deviation of normal to normal intervals. These aren't just marketing numbers. They're the same underlying measures used in cardiology research and, increasingly, in consumer wearables. It's worth noting that HRV is also highly individual. What counts as high or low varies enormously by age, fitness level, and even genetics. So single number comparisons between people or dramatic percentage claims without a clear baseline should generally be treated with some skepticism. It is true that elite military selection programs, including U.S. Navy SEAL training pipelines, have studied physiological stress markers including heart rate and cortisol response in candidates, and that psychological resilience under extreme physical and sedative stress correlates with better outcomes. Whether HRV specifically is used as a formal selection metric versus being one of several stress response measures researchers have studied in that population is less clearly documented in public sources. Unverified, remove or check. Treat the specific claim that Navy SEAL selection formally scores candidates by vagal tone as unconfirmed rather than established fact. What's well established is this: HRV biofeedback training. Deliberately practicing slow, paced breathing while monitoring your heart rate variability has real, peer-reviewed evidence behind it for reducing anxiety symptoms and improving stress resilience. Multiple systematic reviews have found HRV biofeedback shows moderate benefits for anxiety, and it's used in some clinical settings alongside other interventions, though researchers are generally careful to note that effect sizes vary across studies, and it works best as one tool among several, not a standalone cure for anxiety disorders. That's the legitimate core of what this protocol is trying to access. Technology explained. Why slow breathing actually works. Here's the mechanism. In plain terms, when you inhale, your heart rate speeds up slightly. When you exhale, it slows down. This is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and it's a completely normal, healthy pattern tied directly to vagal activity. Slow, extended exhales, longer than your inhales, mechanically increase vagal tone by prolonging that slowing phase. This is one of the best replicated findings in this entire field. Breathing at roughly 5 to 6 breaths per minute, with exhales longer than inhales, reliably increases HRV and activates the parasympathetic system. This is real. It's measurable, and it doesn't require any mystical framing to be worth doing. This particular breathing rate, often described as resonance frequency breathing, in the clinical literature appears to align with natural oscillations in your baroreflex system, the mechanism your body uses to regulate blood pressure moment to moment. When you breathe at roughly your own resonance frequency, typically somewhere between 4.5 and 7 breaths per minute depending on the individual, your heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rhythm all synchronize into a smoother, more efficient pattern. This is the actual mechanism behind most HRV biofeedback training programs used in clinical and sports psychology settings. And it's a genuinely elegant piece of applied physiology. No manifestation language required to make it interesting. The 4-7-8 breathing pattern, a 4-second inhale, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale, was popularized by Dr. Andrew Weil. Adapted from pranayama breathing traditions, it isn't itself a rigorously randomized controlled trial-validated exact ratio compared to other slow breathing patterns, but it fits within the well-supported broader category of slow, exhale-dominant breathing, and many people find the counted structure easier to stick with than unstructured slow breathing. The humming component has real support too. Research on vocal vibration and vagal stimulation, including work looking at chanting Om. Similar low-frequency vocalizations has found that humming and controlled vocal exhales can increase vagal activity, partly because the vagus nerve runs directly past your vocal cords and larynx, and partly because slow, controlled exhalation itself is the main driver. Corrected, the original cited University of Texas research on the 80 to 120 Hz range specifically. This precise frequency claim could not be independently verified in the peer-reviewed literature, so treat it as approximate rather than an exact validated threshold. The forward lean posture with your head down is a genuine physiological phenomenon too. It's related to what's sometimes called the mammalian dive reflex, most classically studied with actual cold water immersion on the face, which does reliably slow heart rate through vagal activation. A forward, head-down posture on its own is a milder version of this general category of reflex. The strongest, best documented version of the dive reflex specifically involves cold water contact with the face, not posture alone. Unverified remover check, attributing this posture specifically to a named doctor. Ariel Schwartz's study could not be confirmed through public research databases. The underlying dive reflex physiology is real, but this specific researcher and study could not be verified. I'm going to walk you through the technique, but I've made 2 changes from versions you may have seen elsewhere. First, I've removed the framing that this manifests specific outcomes. I'll explain what it can realistically help with instead. Second, a genuine safety note. Breath holding combined with pelvic floor tensing and tongue pressure is not risk-free for everyone. If you have any cardiovascular condition, uncontrolled high blood pressure, a history of fainting, glaucoma, are pregnant, or have an anxiety or panic disorder, talk to a doctor before trying extended breath holds, and stop immediately if you feel dizzy, lightheaded, or unwell. Set up. Find 4 minutes of uninterrupted, private time in a chair. Position. Sit toward the front edge of your chair, feet flat and wider than shoulder width. Lean forward with your elbows resting on your knees and your head drop down. This mildly compresses your abdomen and puts your head below your heart, which can support the vagal response described above. Cycle 1. Breath foundation. Close your eyes. Exhale fully. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds, breathing into your belly rather than your chest, feeling your abdomen expand. Hold gently for up to 7 seconds. Swallowing once during the hold is a small, low-risk addition. Some people find helps them notice the sensation of the vagus nerve region in the throat. Though this specific swallow-to-anchor mechanism doesn't have dedicated research behind it, then exhale slowly for 8 seconds through your mouth with a low, soft humming sound. Cycle 2. Engagement and release. Repeat the same 4-7-8 breath pattern. During the inhale and hold, you can gently press your tongue to the roof of your mouth. A mild, low-risk addition rooted in yogic practice, sometimes called Kachari Mudra. In that tradition, though its specific effect on vagal tone via the trigeminal nerve isn't something I could verify in peer-reviewed research, if you choose to add gentle pelvic floor engagement here, keep it mild, light contraction, not a hard clench, and release everything completely on the exhale. The real evidence-backed part of this cycle is the contrast itself. Consciously engaging muscles and then consciously, fully releasing them is a legitimate and well-studied relaxation technique on its own, independent of any vagus nerve framing, and is essentially a variant of progressive muscle relaxation. Cycle 3. Applying it to a real situation. This is where I'd reframe the original Scripps approach. Instead of vividly imagining a specific outcome arriving and trying to broadcast that feeling outward, use this cycle to mentally rehearse how you want to show up in an upcoming situation. A negotiation, a hard conversation, a presentation. Visualization for performance preparation does have real support in sports psychology and performance research, but the mechanism is about rehearsing your own composure, responses, and behavior, not about transmitting a signal that changes what other people or circumstances do. Breathe the same 4-7-8 pattern while picturing yourself staying calm and clear through the moment you're preparing for cycle for settling. One final round of the same pattern. No visualization, just the breath itself. Let your nervous system settle into a slower baseline before you sit up slowly and open your eyes. Warmth in the chest or throat, a feeling of heaviness or looseness in the shoulders, and a general sense of calm are all commonly reported after slow breathing practices like this, and they do plausibly reflect real parasympathetic activation, not placebo alone. Though expectation effects are also a well-documented part of how any relaxation practice feels. Tingling in the hands is sometimes reported too. This is generally attributed to mild changes in peripheral blood flow during relaxation, not a distinct energy phenomenon. It's worth zooming out for a second, because this style of content, mixing legitimate neuroscience terminology with manifestation and success coaching claims, has become extremely common across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram wellness spaces over the past few years. Search interest in vagus nerve content has grown substantially, and polyvagal theory in particular has become one of the most frequently cited and frequently oversimplified frameworks in pop psychology content. Legitimate concepts like HRV, biofeedback, box breathing, and slow diaphragmatic breathing, all used seriously in clinical psychology. Sports performance, and even some hospital anxiety management programs, get borrowed into content that then attaches unfalsifiable outcome claims. Specific percentage increases in vagal stimulation, precise before and after business statistics, anonymous testimonials with dramatic numbers attached. There's a recognizable production pattern behind a lot of this content, worth naming so you can spot it elsewhere. Start with a real, citable piece of science. Porges heart math, HRV research, all genuinely exist and are genuinely interesting. Attach a dramatic but unverifiable anecdote or study early, before viewers have their skepticism engaged. Introduce a numbered protocol with precise timing, because specificity reads as credibility, even when the specific numbers themselves aren't independently validated. Layer in real physiological detail. Swallowing reflexes, trigeminal nerve pathways. Diaphragm compression, because accurate anatomical detail makes the surrounding unverified claims feel more trustworthy by association. Then close with dramatic testimonial numbers and a call to action. None of these individual pieces is necessarily malicious, and creators making this kind of content may genuinely believe the framework works. But the cumulative effect is content that borrows the authority of real science to sell an unfalsifiable promise. Those testimonial-style claims, a financial advisor's close rate jumping from 42% to 71%, a software engineer's investor calls flipping within 6 weeks, follow a very recognizable pattern in wellness marketing. Specific enough to sound credible, but with no verifiable source, no comparison group, and no way to rule out other explanations for the change. Unverified, remove, or check. These anecdotes could not be traced to any verifiable source and should be treated as illustrative marketing examples, not evidence. None of that means slow breathing didn't help those hypothetical people feel calmer in meetings. Feeling calmer in a sales or investment conversation plausibly does affect how you come across. It just means the specific numbers attached to these stories shouldn't be treated as data. It's also worth pointing out a basic statistical issue with anecdotes like these, even setting aside whether they're verifiable at all. A sales close rate or investor response rate can shift for dozens of reasons in any given month. Market conditions, seasonality, an improved pitch deck, simple regression to the mean after an unusually bad stretch. Attributing a specific percentage change entirely to a 4-minute breathing exercise without any control group or comparison period isn't how causal claims are established in actual research. This is a general pattern worth watching for across all wellness and self-improvement content, not just this particular video. The more precise and dramatic a before and after number sounds, the more it's worth asking where exactly that number came from. This pattern isn't unique to one creator or one video. It reflects a much larger shift happening across the wellness and self-improvement content industry, where consumer wearables now let anyone track their own HRV in real-time devices from Whoop, Apple, and Garmin. All now surface HRV data directly to users, which has driven genuine public interest in the underlying science. That's a good development in one sense. Real physiological data is now widely accessible, and people can actually test claims about their own bodies, instead of taking a creator's word for it. But it's also created an opening for content that borrows the credibility of that real data and real terminology, then attaches speculative or fabricated claims on top. Because HRV, vagal tone, and polyvagal theory now sound authoritative to a mainstream audience that may not have the background to spot where legitimate science ends and marketing begins. The HeartMath Institute, referenced in some versions of this content, is a real research organization. And it's true that the heart does generate a measurable electromagnetic field. This part is uncontroversial physics. In HeartMath's own published research led by researcher Rollin McCrady, not Rin McCrady, as some versions of this script misnaming him, documents the field extending several feet from the body using sensitive magnets. Where HeartMath's claims move into more contested territory is in suggesting that this field meaningfully carries emotional information between people or influences others. Physiology at a distance in ways relevant to everyday life outcomes. Those broader claims are not accepted as established fact by mainstream cardiology or neuroscience, and should be understood as HeartMath's own research program rather than settled science. It's a useful example of exactly the pattern this video is trying to teach you to spot. A real, measurable physical phenomenon, the heart's electromagnetic field, genuinely exists and is genuinely detectable, gets extended into a much larger, unverified claim that field broadcasts your intentions and helps you attract outcomes without a comparable level of independent verification for the second part. Clinical and academic vagus nerve research itself remains active and genuinely promising in narrower, well-defined areas. Vagus nerve stimulation devices are FDA cleared for epilepsy and treatment-resistant depression, and research continues into non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation for conditions like migraine, cluster headache, and some inflammatory conditions, including early-stage research into inflammatory bowel disease and rheumatoid arthritis. That's a meaningfully different claim than saying breathing exercises can be tuned to attract business opportunities. And conflating the two does a disservice to both the legitimate, clinical research and to viewers trying to figure out what's actually going to help them. Where this space is likely headed, expect more consumer-facing HRV and vagal tone tracking built directly into everyday wearables. More legitimate research on breathing-based interventions for anxiety and stress. This is a genuinely active area of clinical psychology and psychophysiology research, and, unfortunately, probably more content that wraps real findings in manifestation language. Because that framing performs well and travels fast. Some platforms and health content policies have started paying closer attention to unverified wellness claims in recent years, particularly around specific medical or outcome guarantees, which may push some of this content towards softer, harder to fact-check phrasing rather than disappearing outright. The best defense as a viewer is simple. Real physiological claims should be traceable to a named institution, and ideally, a specific published study. You could look up yourself. Claims about a nervous system frequency attracting external outcomes, by contrast, aren't the kind of claim that can be tested or falsified at all, which is usually a sign you've left science and entered marketing. It's also worth saying plainly what this video isn't arguing. It isn't arguing that breathing techniques are useless, that ancient contemplative traditions have nothing to teach modern neuroscience, or that feeling calm before a big moment doesn't matter. Slow breathing, humming, posture, and mindful attention are old tools with genuinely new scientific support behind parts of how they work. The issue is specifically the layer of unverifiable outcome claims, the classified studies that don't exist, the precise percentages with no source. The idea that regulating your nervous system sends a detectable signal that changes what other people or circumstances do. Strip that layer away, and what's left is a genuinely useful 4-minute breathing practice worth having in your toolkit. So here's the honest bottom line. The vagus nerve is real. Polyvagal theory is legitimate, influential science, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges over several decades of research. Slow, exhale-dominant breathing genuinely does increase heart rate variability and activate your parasympathetic nervous system. That part of this video is worth actually doing. Humming, a forward-leaning posture, and mild muscle engagement and release can plausibly support that same effect. even if some of the more specific mechanistic claims attached to them haven't been independently verified. What isn't supported is the idea that any of this reprograms your biology to broadcast a signal that pulls in business deals, relationships, or opportunities from the outside world. What it can genuinely help with is showing up calmer, clearer, and less reactive when real opportunities do arrive. Which admittedly is a less flashy pitch than manifestation, but it's the one that's actually backed by evidence, and it's the one I'd rather hand you. Try the breathing pattern. Skip the mysticism. And if a wellness video promises you a specific percentage improvement in a biological process, a named, classified study you can't find anywhere, or a guaranteed change in your luck, that's exactly the moment to pause and go look it up yourself, the same way we just did here. It usually takes less than 5 minutes of searching to find out whether a cited study actually exists, and that habit alone will save you from a large share of wellness misinformation on this topic and far beyond it. If you want more videos that separate real neuroscience and physiology from wellness marketing, fact-checked, sourced, and no manifestation required, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment.